The year before he started A Study in Scarlet, Doyle had met his future wife, Louise, and that relationship, like his own home life, had a gothic twist to it. He met Louise because her brother was suffering from cerebral meningitis. Doyle took the patient in and nursed him at his own home. The boy, he was in his early 20s, died. This is his grave. 2 months later, Doyle had married his sister.
From darkness into light. Sort of statement that's vague enough to go down well, even at spiritualist seances down the road in Portsmouth. A relationship that Doyle wanted to be as uncomplicated and chivalrous as Dr. Watson's attitude to his own future bride actually began in largely unacknowledged misery.
There is evidence to suggest that Doyle married Louise Hawkins in the wake of a well-meant but ill-advised experiment with drug treatment on her brother. Did he marry her for love or out of guilt? For whatever reasons, Doyle was an honourable, big-hearted man. When he made a decision, he stuck to it.
This was the troubled background to the birth of Sherlock Holmes. And yet, so anxious was Doyle to disclaim any seriousness in the enterprise that at the opening of Study in Scarlet, he has Watson comment on the literary origins of his partner, owning up to the fact that Sherlock Holmes has really been pinched from the pages of Doyle's favourite detective story writer, Edgar Allan Poe.
Doyle had discovered Poe's infallible detective, the Chevalier Dupin, hero of the murders in the Rue Morgue. Dupin, from his crumbling mansion in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, investigates the horrible murder of 2 women in a miserable thoroughfare running between the Rue Richelieu and the Rue Saint-Roch. Poe is an American writer, but his evocation of the Parisian scene of the crime is eerily authentic. I'm looking for the street that gives the story its title, the Rue Morgue. Both the other streets are on the map. It must be round here somewhere. I've always known, since reading the story as a boy, that the Rue Morgue, like Baker Street, actually exists. Poe has an extraordinary feeling for place, and he sets up the locale with a kind of accuracy that makes you think you're reading an account of a murder that could have actually happened.
Excusez-moi, monsieur, je cherche la rue Morgue.
Je crois que c'est dans l'autre rive, sur l'autre rive. Ici on est à la rive gauche et ça doit être rive droite. Mais je vais vous montrer j'ai un plan, je vais vous montrer sur le plan.
Ça existe la rue Morgue?
Ouais.
Oui?
Je crois.
Excusez-moi, pour la rue Morgue.
La rue
Morgue. Morgue.
Je ne la connais pas.
Non? Près de la rue de Seine ou rue de Richelieu. Excusez-moi, pour la rue Morgue.
Ah, Monge.
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 No, morgue. M-O-R-E. Morgue, like morgue and les cadavres. There is no such street as the Rue Morgue. It only exists in the imagination of Edgar Allan Poe. But Poe, who by the way first attained literary respectability in France, translated by Baudelaire, was a master of the hoax. He was a man who wrote an article purporting to describe the first crossing of the Atlantic by balloon, and thousands of people turned out to welcome the 19th century equivalent of Richard Branson, who of course never turned up.
Poe's choice of Paris was no accident. Way ahead of Scotland Yard, the French led the world in the application of science to crime. Doyle was interested in their methods. These horrific images from the archives of the French police are some of the first scene of crime pictures ever taken. They date from around the time the early Holmes stories were published in the 1890s. They're accurate records, precisely to scale. The detective story deals with one of the most frightening achievements of the 19th century, the reduction of people to statistics and characters to cases.
Alphonse Bertillon, the Frenchman who designed the apparatus on which I'm now sitting as a way of classifying and identifying criminals, what nowadays I suppose would be called the photo fit, once said he was greatly influenced by the scientific methods of Sherlock Holmes. Although the French led the world in scientific crime detection, it was the British in Bengal in 1897 who first introduced fingerprinting on a large scale. Fingerprints went on to be the most important tool of modern crime detection. And fingerprints do crop up in the Holmes stories, in a tale set in the place where the next and most important chapter in our author's life was due to take place.
Houses like these in South Norwood in London, where Doyle moved with his wife Louise in 1891, were inhabited by the newly literate masses, the product of the Education Acts of the previous 20 years. These were the very people who were followers of Sherlock Holmes, commuters who bought copies of a new popular magazine called The Strand at railway bookstores.
It was here that Doyle established himself as a professional writer. In fact, the house features in an early Holmes case called The Adventure of the Norwood Builder. He installed himself in a study, just there, on the ground floor, and between 1891 and 1893, as well as churning out historical romances now largely forgotten and a huge amount of journalism, he also wrote all those great early Holmes stories, the ones we fans like to read again and again, especially when we're ill. Now, like a lot of the places Doyle lived in after the success of Holmes, it's an old folks' home. But back in the 1890s, it was a prosperous suburban villa, the home of a newly successful man. And Holmes was an instant success with the public. Every time Doyle put a Holmes story in the Strand magazine, the circulation of the paper shot up by 100,000 copies. And Doyle, who was a practical man about money, bought shares in the paper.
The average circulation, I think, was about 200,000, rising 250,000. But the name of Sherlock Holmes spread very rapidly. And people always say that the very first story, which appeared in Beaton's Christmas Annual, kind of faded without notice. But it was actually extremely well reviewed. And to those who read it, of course, the magic of Sherlock Holmes was there. But it was the Strand magazine that gave it very high profile, which he never lost.
In 1893, only 4 years after his first appearance, Doyle decided to kill Holmes off. That year, his wife Louise was diagnosed as having TB, then a fatal condition. She was advised to take the cure in Switzerland. It was while he was there that Doyle planned how to put an end to his great detective. As every schoolboy knows, Holmes fell into the Reichenbach Falls after a struggle with the evil Professor Moriarty. The public were not pleased. They wore black armbands in the street. This is Undershaw, the house he built for Louise in 1897. It had tennis courts, a garage, its own electrical generating system, all the trappings of popular success. And 1,000 feet up here in the Surrey Hills, people said it had the climate of Switzerland. At this now forgotten home, even the writing shed has survived. It was here that Doyle once again tried to find the voice that would win him serious literary recognition. All his life, in fact, he'd valued his historical novels far more than the Holmes stories.